Kylian Mbappé has already lived a career most players can only dream of, a World Cup winner at 19, a global superstar before 20, and a player who has carried France on the biggest stage football has to offer. But what is coming in 2026 feels different in a way nobody is fully explaining yet. Because this time, Mbappé is not just part of the team. He is the captain. He is the leader of France. And he is the player everything is being built around. That sounds like success on the surface. But in football, leadership at the World Cup is not just an honor, it is a burden that changes how every mistake is judged, how every missed chance is remembered, and how every defeat is written into history. And for Mbappé, that pressure is arriving at the worst possible time. Because just months before this tournament, there were injury concerns that forced people to question his physical condition. There were moments where his fitness was not guaranteed. There were whispers that even one setback could change France's entire tournament. And when a team depends on one player the way France depends on Mbappé, that is not just a detail, that is a warning sign. But the most dangerous part of this story is not even the injury. It is the expectation. Because France is not arriving at this World Cup hoping to compete. They are arriving expected to win it. And when a nation believes that strongly in one player, the pressure does not stay outside the pitch. It follows him into every touch, every run, every missed chance. And that raises a question that nobody in France wants to answer out loud yet. Is Mbappé stepping into the tournament where he confirms his greatness forever? Or the one where the weight finally becomes too heavy to carry? But what makes this World Cup different for Mbappé is not his form, not his goals, not even his status as France captain. It is the pressure that has slowly been building around him since the moment he lifted the 2018 World Cup as a teenager. Because back then, he was the future of football, the unstoppable kid who had already conquered the world before he turned 20. But now, in 2026, he is no longer the future. He is the standard everyone is measured against, and that changes everything. And inside the French camp, there is a quiet truth that nobody says too loudly. This tournament might define whether Mbappé becomes a true all-time legend or just one of the greats who could not fully dominate a second era. Because France is not arriving as underdogs, they are arriving as one of the biggest favorites in the tournament, which means anything less than a final will be seen as failure. But the problem is not just pressure, it is expectation from everywhere. Fans, media, former players, even rival nations are watching him like he is the main character of the entire World Cup. And the strange part is, Mbappé knows this better than anyone, because he has already experienced both sides of football glory, the joy of winning and the weight of being blamed when things go wrong. And now the real question begins to form, not just about France, but about him personally. Can Mbappé actually carry this team through the hardest World Cup draw they have faced in years? Or is this the moment where the pressure finally becomes too heavy even for him? Because this France squad is not built around one player anymore, it is built around competition, depths, and constant pressure for places, which means Mbappé cannot afford even a small drop in performance. Players like Dembélé, Thuram, and Alice are not just support cast, they are match winners on their own, and that changes the entire dynamic inside the team. And in tournaments like the World Cup, that kind of internal competition can either create unstoppable energy or silent tension that shows up at the worst possible moment. But Mbappé's biggest challenge is not only inside his team, it is also outside it, because every opponent now prepares for him like he is the final boss of football. Defensive lines drop deeper, double marking becomes normal, and entire tactical plans are built just to stop him from getting space even for a second. And still, he finds ways, because that is what separates him from most players in world football. His ability to turn one moment into a match-changing event. But there is something different about this World Cup, something even Mbappé cannot fully control, and it is the fact that this tournament is happening in a football era where new stars like Lamine Yamal are rising at the same time. So now the question is no longer just about Mbappé versus defenders, it is about Mbappé versus a new generation that is already being compared to him. And as the tournament gets closer, one final thought keeps coming back. If this is truly Mbappé's hardest World Cup, then what happens if he fails to win it this time? That question might sound unfair. After all, Mbappé has already achieved more than most footballers could ever dream of. He won the World Cup at 19. He played one of the greatest World Cup finals ever in 2022. And he has spent years proving himself at the very highest level. But football is not always fair. The higher you climb, the higher the expectations become. And for Mbappé, expectations have reached a level few players in history have ever experienced. Because every time he steps onto the pitch now, people are not asking if he is great. They already know he is. They are asking something much bigger. Can he become one of the greatest players the sport has ever seen? And that is where the pressure starts to become dangerous. Because history remembers trophies. History remembers World Cups. History remembers the players who delivered when the entire world was watching. That is exactly why this tournament feels different. Not because Mbappé is a different player, but because the football world is looking at him differently. And then there is France's group. On paper, many fans think France should qualify comfortably. But World Cups have never cared about predictions. One bad game can change everything. One injury can change everything. One shocking upset can destroy years of preparation. Just ask Argentina in 2022 when they lost their opening match. Nobody expected it. Yet it happened. And that is the beauty and cruelty of the World Cup. It does not reward reputation. It rewards performance. For Mbappé, that means every match matters. Every chance matters. Every decision matters. Because somewhere in the background, another story is already beginning. A story about who will become the face of football after this tournament. And whether people admit it or not, Mbappé is right at the center of that conversation. But the biggest challenge is still ahead. Because if France reach the knockout rounds, that is when the real pressure begins. Because the knockout stage is where legends are created. And sometimes, where legends are broken. Nobody remembers how easy the group stage was. Nobody remembers who had the most possession. Nobody remembers who looked good in training. People remember the nights that changed football history. And Mbappé knows that better than anyone. He has already lived through those moments. He knows what it feels like to lift the World Cup. And he knows what it feels like to come painfully close and watch someone else celebrate. That experience could become France's biggest advantage. Because while many players dream about pressure, Mbappé has actually survived it. But there is another reason this World Cup feels so important. Age. Not because Mbappé is old. Far from it. But because football moves faster than ever. A few years ago, he was the young superstar everyone was talking about. Now, names like Lamine Yamal are beginning to dominate headlines. A new generation is arriving. And every new generation needs someone to replace. That is how football has always worked. The question is whether Mbappé is ready to hand over that spotlight. Or whether he plans to hold on to it for many more years. Because if he wins this World Cup, the conversation changes completely. Suddenly, he is not just the player who won in 2018. He becomes the leader who carried France to another title. A player with multiple World Cups. A player whose legacy becomes almost impossible to ignore. And that is why every match in this tournament will feel bigger than normal. Every goal will be analyzed. Every mistake will be discussed. Every performance will be judged against the highest standard imaginable. The pressure is enormous. The expectations are enormous. But then again, maybe that is exactly where Mbappé is at his best. And as France prepares to begin its World Cup journey, one final question remains. What if the hardest World Cup of Mbappé's career becomes the greatest one of his life? Maybe that is the reason millions of fans will be watching France more closely than any other team. Not because they are favorites. Not because they have superstars. But because they have a captain standing at one of the most important moments of his entire career. A captain with everything to gain. And everything to lose. Because if France falls early, critics will say this generation failed to deliver when it mattered most. They will question the tactics. They will question the squad. And above all, they will question Mbappé. But if France goes all the way, if they survive the pressure, if they overcome the toughest opponents, if Mbappé lifts that trophy one more time, then football history may remember this tournament very differently. It will not be remembered as the World Cup where Mbappé faced the hardest challenge of his career. It will be remembered as the World Cup where he conquered it. The World Cup where a young champion became an all-time legend. The The World Cup where he proved that greatness is not about talent alone. It is about what you do when the pressure is at its highest. And maybe that is why this story is so fascinating. Because right now, nobody knows how it ends. Not the fans. Not the media. Not even Mbappé himself. All we know is that the stage is ready. The world is watching. And once the first whistle blows, there will be nowhere left to hide. For France. For their captain. For Kylian Mbappé. So the question is no longer whether this will be the hardest World Cup of his career. The question is, will it become the World Cup that defines his legacy forever?